Welcome to Nacht Waffen Pilot with Penny Bradley. And today we are doing an introduction to the new network. Daryl Neely has chosen to name it Penny Bradley's Global Conspiracy Network. And today I'm introducing some of the people that'll be on. They may or may not all show up. But the first one who is here is Jeffrey Daugherty. He's the host of Late Night in the Heartland, which plays on the Global Enlightenment Radio Network. And I swiped a bio from one of the sites that shares his video. So, Jeffrey Daugherty, former 20-year minister and Bible college graduate with over 100,000 hours study in the biblical texts, and now more than 40 years of unindoctrination. From spirituality and religion to politics, science, culture, and history, no dominant paradigm is safe. Jeffrey is YouTube's Christian whistleblower, and he's just getting started. He's a regular guest on Coast to Coast AM and has appeared on the Power Hour, Talk is Jericho, Tinfoil Hat, Young Pharaoh, The Leak Project, and many others. And today he's on Nacht Waffen Pilot with me. So
absolutely.
Welcome, Jeffrey.
Well, I was personally pulling for the Jeffrey Daugherty Paranormal Network, but it didn't work out that way. And I'm not on YouTube anymore, but all those other places are true. And it's an honor and a privilege to be with you, Penny. And
thank you.
Daryl, it's a good thing Daryl called me. I was trying to get my drone up and running. I wasn't going to be late, but I didn't realize how close it was. So the phone's ringing. I'm like, oh, I better go in there and get on. So it's good to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. I was on your show not too long ago.
And we had a great time.
Yeah, we did. And so, yeah. Daryl wanted us to do this today, and I'm kind of overwhelmed having a whole network named for me.
How about that?
So
tell us about the network. What's going to be on it? Do you know?
I know that it's going to be folks with a different from the standard approach to politics, religion, and those folks who are exposing black ops. And I was told it would be the secret space programs, the black ops in general, and Illuminati type secret societies.
Interesting.
But it's a matter of getting hosts who want to talk about all those things. So,
right. Absolutely.
So,
because it's definitely a fascinating genre, and there's so many, ways you can go, so many places you can go, many rabbit holes and twists and turns. And I kind of wanted to ask you about one of those. I did a show not too long ago, a couple weeks. Time all molds together when you're doing 14 hours of radio a week. You can't remember what you did yesterday, much less last week. But we did a show about secret underground wars, and I think you were quoted in the material that I was using.
That doesn't surprise me. I'm when Daryl says that I'm the mother of the SSP, there are people who actually call me that.
Yeah, the mother of the SSP, huh?
Well,
you got some daughters out there, and some of them, I don't know if they are pretending they're daughters or not, but not everybody's as credible as you are, it doesn't seem, and it kind of hurts the genre a little bit. But just because you have a bad apple here and there doesn't mean you throw out the whole bunch, does it?
Well, we have a lot of people who are operating from partial memories. And
interesting.
As you get more memory, things fall into place better. I found that some of the things that I thought were so the first year I was talking, later on, I found out they weren't. So I had to do a couple of retractions about things.
Interesting.
So they were.
Did that make you feel anything other than okay to make those retractions? Did you feel like a failure, or was it just the way it is?
It's the way it is, and I felt it was being intellectually honest.
I agree 100%.
So I'm not out here making a living off of this. I'm trying to get kids no longer being kidnapped for these programs. And if I make a mistake in the memories, then it's being intellectually honest to admit it.
Absolutely. And when you talk about the secret underground wars that many people believe are going on right now, the subject of the Nacht Waffen comes up in that discussion, especially as it relates to Antarctica. Do you kind of generally agree that that's probably likely to be a part of the whole scenario?
My understanding is that the German presence in Antarctica basically moved.
Yep, I read that they fled, that they took off.
Well, not fled, but they moved. In the 1990s, they built a capital city on Mars, and they left a couple of people guarding the buildings, and everybody else left. It wasn't a forced thing. It was they just left.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm hearing a lot of things being said by a lot of people that I put them in the category of hero songs.
Can you explain that to me?
Okay, a hero song is where you've got a bunch of guys, they go into battle. They're so scared, they're pissing themselves, which is real common, and they somehow survive the battle. And then they're sitting around the campfire afterwards, and they're drinking beer or whatever alcohol they've got. And they're bragging about how brave and wonderful and courageous they were. And it's a way of rewriting their memories where they can live with them.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's very interesting.
That's a very, very common experience. And it's a lot of why the memories of the various veterans out here are very different. You can find the same thing happened in Vietnam, the same thing happened in World War II. And from the perspective of most of these people, comparing it to Vietnam, they consider me the Viet Cong because I served with the other side.
Gotcha. So, meaning, I guess, loosely stated, the bad guys, right?
Most people consider them the bad guys, but that's one of the big secrets about out there. Everybody thinks they're the good guys. Nobody will ever tell you we're the bad guys because they don't see themselves that way.
Well, that's not a big surprise, is it? But, I always, when I was reading about the Nacht Waffen, and I lived in Germany for 3 years, and at one time was pretty fluent in German. So, I mean, Nacht Waffen is kind of basically like dark weapon or dark force.
Night fleet.
Night fleet. That
in the program I was in, they referred to going into space as ins der Nacht, into the night.
Interesting.
So it was a poetic name.
Absolutely.
Of Night Fleet. And it's plural because they have more than one fleet.
Mm-hmm. Now, my question is a Nacht Waffen necessarily nefarious?
No.
I agree with that. In fact, I would almost go to argue that there are benevolent, or at least intentionally benevolent, Nacht Waffen.
My experience is that they are just humans from Earth, from a German culture, who have set up shop off-world. And they are trying to live their lives in peace. And one of the conditions of renting where their colony is that they have to serve the greater empire, which is run by the Draco. They have to serve in the military. And that's what Nacht Waffen is their German military that is serving to pay the rent. Now, this is not very far-fetched from total German culture to begin with. How many of these tribal little countries before Germany united, how many of those little areas were already using their sons as mercenaries to get enough money to buy food because they couldn't grow enough food in their own little country? So this is just a continuation of that same theme of they're selling military prowess in exchange for survival.
And that's interesting. And what a lot of people don't realize, and it kind of backs up what you just said, you know, the old German anthem, you know, Deutschland über alles, you know, during World War II, it was sold as, that means Germany's going to take over everything. Germany's going to run everything. And it was, you know, seen as a really nefarious thing. But actually the Deutschland über alles in German context is basically just a united Germany above all of these little fighting city-states. So they're not really talking about a nefarious German plan to control the world. They're talking about uniting in, you know, the German Volk, as they're called, yeah, and becoming the sum of the whole greater than the sum of the parts, I guess would be an easy way to say
it. My understanding from serving with them is that they considered that they were being abused and genocided on a regular basis from the time of the Romans forward.
The Germans did.
The Germans did.
Absolutely. I would agree with that.
And that they reached a point where they realized all the neighbors were taking advantage of their military services, but still treating them like they were third-class citizens in Europe. And they had a lot of their people who were starving. And so their goal was to unite all of the German-speaking peoples into one nation and hopefully have enough land to be able to feed them all. That this was the goal, and that everybody else freaked out. Now, if you're using somebody's services to defend your own country, and they suddenly decide they're going to be their own country instead, yeah, I can see that being a little scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But, and, you know, there's a lot of lore, and I'm basically asking you to tell me your opinion on this. I've got mine, and of course, you've come from a knowledge base broader than mine in this arena. You know, I go back, I try to be objective. I try to unindoctrinate myself, even in, you know, the historical paradigm. I don't believe what I'm told about history. I think that, you know, Napoleon had it about right when he said history is a set of lies agreed upon. So I try to look at all of the history. Yeah, thanks. I try to look at all of history, even the history that is the most, you know, vociferously, you know, expounded by the zealots, and look at it objectively. And I'm able to look at, you know, Germany between the world wars, and look at what the German Chancellor, we won't name his name, we don't want to cause a bunch of people to go to hysteria. But
Thank you. I got kicked off of Facebook once for simply describing the real history.
Yeah. So the German Chancellor took a nation very much like you said. They were starving to death. They'd been used and abused. He gave them a focus. They rebuilt their economy. They became very strong. And even though, you know, people say, oh, they invaded this, they invaded that, all they really were doing initially was just taking back lands that had been stolen by them that contained German people that were being basically ethnically cleansed. So, but the whole thing I'm trying to get to is the lore that I've seen, the lore in the SSP community is that everything that came out of Deutschland and went up to Antarctica was bad and horrible and murderous and killing. I'm not convinced that's so.
No. Okay. What I remember is I was picked up when I was 4 years old. I spent 5 years at Langley, I thought it was the CIA, but the CIA agent who uploaded my file said my packet came from the OSS. So,
which was the precursor to the CIA, correct?
yes, but it should have been disbanded 10 years before I was born. So how they had my file is still an open question.
Well, Penny, you know, Ronald Reagan, we're not going to quote him as an authority, but he did once say that the closest thing that we'll ever see to eternal life in this world is a government program.
Exactly. So what we had going on here was I spent 5 years as a guest of whoever at Langley Air Force Base with a 6-month side trip to Montauk during that time. All of the memories that I have from this particular timeline were verified by Doris Neely, the CIA data entry clerk who uploaded my file. There was one thing I remembered she said wasn't in the file, and 2 things that were in it that she was surprised I didn't remember. But that basically I'm telling exactly word for word what she uploaded. So at least I know that I'm not crazy.
Right, okay. And you're consistent, which lends integrity and credibility.
And when I remember something that changes the picture, I'm honest about it. So I'm not trying to defend something that isn't true. So, okay, once I got through this 5 years at Langley.
Do you remember what you were doing during those 5 years?
I was mind fractured.
Okay.
And then I was sent to Montauk because I survived the mind fracture. I ended up with the 13 by 13 by 13 hierarchical cubic array of altars, just like Stuart Swerdlow describes.
Wow.
This was standard practice throughout all of the agencies. So this is what I was put through. And I usually don't go into a lot of detail, but the overview is that sexual abuse is the primary method of creating altars in children.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So if you have somebody, we call it in the wild, who has altars, it's because they were sexually abused as a child.
So in the wild would mean not in the service?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be, because this is a natural function of the mind when you put under too much stress.
Right.
It will take that memory, put it in a bubble, and then that bubble will eventually form another personality.
So it's a protection device, right?
It's a natural protection device because things happen to people. And it's a way for children to survive things happening. And so, especially if they're sexually abused by the people that are caring for them, that their entire existence is dependent on this person who's violating them.
Oh, wow.
So this is the reason for it. So these agencies are taking advantage of a natural protection device. And so I ended up doing the math. That's 2,197 altars.
Wow.
I have reintegrated 32 of them.
So you're just getting started.
I'm just getting started. And
will you ever get through it, do you think?
I'm 66. Life expectancy in my family is about 90. So
you got a chance.
I got a chance to get through probably half of it.
Yeah.
So, that's what I've been working on, is getting as far as I can. My partner, the man I live with, is a trained Iroquois shaman.
Oh, nice.
And we have been using soul fragment retrieval. We have compatible abilities to go into trance together without using entheogens. So I'm not on a drug trip doing this, and neither is he. And we're going into this trance together where we both see what's going on. And so I call in soul fragments, which is what the altars are. And then he checks to make sure that they're actually me.
Oh, that's very important.
That's very important because you don't want to let something in that isn't you.
Unless you're a Christian, then you do.
I used to be a Christian.
Sorry, I had to throw that out there. It's like I've got spiritual Tourette's, Penny. It just comes out.
Okay. I used to be a Christian. That is part of my story. And folks who are Christian are very quickly informed that I have been through 104 exorcisms because the Episcopal Church did not believe that these were mind fragments. They believed they were demons.
Of course, yeah.
And the first one was with the bishop's special team, and the rest were with a group that had been trained by Elijah House.
Wow.
So you were in a Pentecostal group. I assume you've heard of Elijah House.
I have.
Yes. So I did 103 exorcisms with Elijah House people.
Wow.
I survived.
I'm surprised.
And I still have altars.
Mm.
So
that doesn't surprise me.
They're not demons.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest problems in my community is you have these religious fanatics who assume they're demons, and they put us through all kinds of spiritual abuse on top of what's already happened to us. And then they wonder why we go crazy.
Interesting, huh?
You reach the point where you cannot trust anybody.
Right.
And I'm blessed. I have Lou. I'm blessed. I have Daryl. I mean, Daryl's mom's the one that verified me. So he has known from before we met, he has known I was real. One of the first things he told me when he was recruiting me for the network was, my mama says you're real, that I have to listen to you. And I'm like, okay. So he has known from the beginning. So, and that's been reassuring because I get lots of flack from people, and bipolar is in my family, and I'm already damaged and bipolar on top of it. So I go through these mood swings.
Sure.
And I will be sitting, tears rolling down my face, and Daryl will call. And people don't understand my connection to Daryl. It's like, well, you guys aren't family. Well, yeah, we are, kind of. You know, because he knows when I'm depressed, and he will call me and will spend however long it takes to get me okay again. And
wow, that's amazing.
Deeply appreciate that. But yeah. So I've interviewed a lot of people on my show. I've been trying to document the disclosure movement. And it ranges from people who've experienced UFOs to people who've experienced cryptids to people who are investigating them to people with experiences from Black Ops. And it's a huge community. And I've been going through and trying to mix it up where it's researchers and folks studying us and experiencers of different things, and keep it mixed up so that it's interesting. There are some folks that I've had more than once because their story is so in-depth. I've had Eric Hecker on several times. I've had Joseph Powell is probably the one I've had on the most. And it's because we serve on a ship together. And so we have memories in common of alters who are serving together. And the first time we really got into any depth, his altar that serves with me came forward. And so it was the two altars talking to each other on the interview.
That must have been an interesting show.
I think it was, wasn't it, Daryl? So,
Penny, I'm not trying to be flippant, but is it possible for you to interview yourself?
I have trouble looking at myself on the screen.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, but could you interview one of your altars is what I'm asking.
I can't be two people at the same time.
Okay. So you can't go back and forth. It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that. Although I was having trouble this time last year with altars shifting.
Oh, okay.
I think there was one show where Daryl was sitting there counting how many times. I think he said it was 27 in one show.
So it's not normally under your control to go from altar to altar?
No.
Okay.
It's something that just happens.
Gotcha.
So, and most of them I don't share memory with. So I end up having to watch the show afterwards to know what I said.
Interesting. Now, when you were in the Nacht Waffen, did you ever learn any interesting information that you could share regarding the Chancellor and the World War II scenario?
The Chancellor was not killed in Berlin. He lived out his days in Argentina.
I would agree with that. Did he go to Did he go to Antarctica? Do you know?
He wasn't welcome there.
Really?
The folks that went to Antarctica saw him as the reason the war was lost, because about halfway through, he rejected their advice and started listening to the Jesuits instead.
Really?
Now, about half of the Operation Paperclip Germans were actually Jesuits as well as Nazis.
That doesn't surprise me at all. That doesn't surprise me at all. So you say about half of them?
About half of them were actually Jesuits. If you go through and look at their personal stories, you'll find where, well, even Joseph Stalin, who was the Russian premier, he was a Jesuit.
Absolutely, 100%.
So you've got a lot of people. You had the secret societies, and then you had the Jesuits infiltrating them. Yep,
which is what they do.
And they were having this behind-the-scenes war of the Illuminati.
Gotcha.
And the Jesuits ended up taking over the Chancellor and made sure Germany lost.
That's interesting. I've never heard that. That's really interesting. Do you know, have you heard any discussion as to why the Chancellor allowed the British to leave Dunkirk instead of wiping them out and ending the war right there?
He was really deeply into the whole Aryan race mythology, and he saw the British as another Aryan race, and he didn't want to destroy a brother.
Yeah. You know, I've said often, and I'll still say it, and I know people take issue with it, but one of the great problems with, I just say our people, you know, we're all people, but, you know, our particular branch of the people is that we have been too good for too long. And we've made some mistakes when we shouldn't have. And that, I don't know if that was one of them, but, you know, just, I think it goes to show that he wasn't willing to kill. He wasn't willing to do wrong he wasn't very pragmatic. He wanted to win, but he wanted a real and an honorable victory. And it wasn't just for Germany. It was beyond that to him. And is that what got him in trouble with the Jesuits? That kind of an attitude?
Okay, what they taught me out there was that the German tribes were Scythians
Yes. Wow, that's
and
great.
and that the Romans were not, and that the Romans consistently tried to destroy them.
Yep.
And when the tribe, the Franks, who had been called Sicambrians before that, came into Gaul, they went all the way to Rome, trashed the place, and that made it where the Vatican was the last refuge of power in the Roman Empire. And so they took over the function of the bureaucracy. So from that point on, Rome as a political group was gone, but Rome as a religious and world power was still there.
Right.
And so from that point forward, Rome took over the effort to wipe out the Scythians. And they started by wiping out the Merovingians, then they wiped out the descendants of Charlemagne, and then they started in with the Crusades. And as part of these Crusades, they created these military groups. And then they sent these military groups to wipe out more Scythians. This would be the Albigensians, the Cathars. And these were in southern France, northern Spain, and into Portugal. And that was the Albigensian Crusade. And the survivors of that went to Germany. And so the Teutonic Knights took over the Crusader function when the Knights Templar lost in Jerusalem. Or rather, at that point, it was Acre that they lost. And so the militant monks all ended up in Prussia. And they were, Prussia was its own little country then. Mm-hmm. So they were all in Prussia, and they were supposed to be wiping out the pagans. But the pagans were Scythians. And they went through Germany east from Prussia into Latvia, into Lithuania. And it was when they headed into Poland that they were finally stopped. And within 100 years, the Teutonic Knights were suddenly back to being a hospital group, which is what they had been when they started.
Interesting stuff. Fascinating. Very, very much so.
Well, what I've done is I remembered what I was taught in Schule on Mars. Mm-hmm. And I remember what I was taught in California. And I've been like, okay, which was the objective truth? And I've been doing the research to find out which was the objective truth. And I found that there was some propaganda taught at Schule.
Sure.
But relative to what was taught in California, it's like 90% objective truth from the Germans and 40% objective truth from California.
Interesting.
So the primary documents are still available. I can't speak it or write it, but I'm learning to read Church Latin because I'm reading these documents. And what I can't figure out for myself, I put through Google Translate. And I have a friend who actually speaks Latin at home. So I'll pop him a document. What does this say? And he'll laugh at me. I told you to learn Latin. So, yeah.
That's funny. That's funny.
The primary historical documents, what people wrote about themselves at the time, are still available. You just have to know where to look for them and be able to read the language they're in. And most Americans only speak modern English. They can't even read the actual language that Shakespeare and the King James Bible were written in.
Right. To say nothing of the Canterbury Tales.
Yeah, the Canterbury Tales, where they talk about the Crusader, that Crusader fought in Prussia. That was the only crusade going on at that time.
Interesting.
So these are all, the truth is out there, but you have to dig for it.
So is the Nacht Waffen still out there?
The Nacht Waffen still out there.
Yeah.
There are 1 trillion Germans in the Draco Empire.
No kidding.
There are more than that outside this galaxy.
No kidding.
They have spread out so that the Bunker im Weltheim is the phrase they use. Bankers in space. That is their enemy. Bankers in space. Well, who are the bankers in space?
I have a pretty good idea.
The military industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned us about. Those are the bankers in space. And those are the enemy of Nacht Waffen. So they have gone to great lengths to escape from those people, because those people have been trying to genocide them since the days of Rome.
Interesting. I have to leave at the top of the hour, but I wanted to ask you another question, if you would care to respond to it or not. Maybe you wouldn't, but you know, we all know the lore about Eisenhower meeting with quote unquote aliens at a couple of U.S. air bases. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Now,
the Treaty of Greada.
I've had this crazy idea, and, you know, it's always very nebulous. You know, he met with these, some say they were tall Nordics, some say they weren't Nordics, but this word Nordic always gets pushed around. I've had the crazy idea, and this, you know, we had the flyby at Washington, D.C. over the Capitol Dome. Is there any possibility that, and, you know, just to set the stage, when Eisenhower had this meeting, he was so distraught that he basically had a mini nervous breakdown for at least a couple of days. They had to cancel everything. He held up in a room. He couldn't leave. He was just totally freaked out. I've often wondered if there's any possibility that Eisenhower was actually greeted by the Chancellor himself in those meetings.
Probably not the Chancellor, but a lot of the aristocracy were still around. And I know that the Washington flap of 52 was Nacht Waffen ships.
Ah, yeah.
So there was a treaty that they wanted signed because they had won World War II at Operation High Jump. And they were dictating terms. And their terms, as I understand them, were actually quite lenient. They wanted to be left alone. They were willing to let the United States pretend that they had won the war. They wanted 150,000 Americans sent to them every year.
Wow.
I was one of those for 1964. They wanted these people for genetic diversity in their own colonies, because they knew the folks they had taken in the first place, they didn't have enough genetic diversity. They also understood, as soon as they started dealing with extraterrestrials, that all Terrans, Earth humans, have more in common with each other than any of us do with anything out there.
Absolutely.
And so their Aryan racist bullshit was dropped.
Interesting.
So Most of the ships are still manned by Germanic people or blends.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of Brits. I've been involved in several Facebook groups with people who have memories of service, and most of us are descended from the Merovingians.
Interesting.
But how is it my daddy put it? He says, them Irishmen, they do get around.
Mm-hmm.
Same is true of the Merovingian descendants. You can be a Merovingian and not be white.
Yeah.
And people are not getting that. But just look at your neighborhoods. How many mixed marriages are there?
Absolutely.
How many kids are there out there that are mixed? And if their parents were Merovingians, so were they.
Yep.
But what they're looking for these programs, the Scythians had telepathy. The Scythians had the ability to manifest what they wanted, almost out of thin air. The Scythians had the ability to mojo their enemies. Today, most humans call those psychic abilities. In the programs, we called them psionic abilities.
Right.
And treated it as a science. But you either had the ability to manipulate energy or you didn't. So there's a genetic basis for it. And they found that usually people of Merovingian descent have it. And those people have been tracked because the Jesuits were trying to eliminate them. So they kept family trees of them.
Wow.
But there are still millions of us.
I'll bet.
You know how it is. You try to stomp something out and it just grows like weeds.
Yep. So no chance that the Chancellor met with Eisenhower?
No chance that the Chancellor met with Eisenhower. He was a persona non grata because of his affiliation with the Jesuits. Interesting.
Okay.
You can look in the histories. He was Roman Catholic, and when the Jesuits started popping by, he basically pushed all of the aristocracy aside and went with the Jesuits. He trusted them because he was a religious man. Now, I have found, and people are going to be mad at me about this, but I have found that religious people tend to not think. They tend to do what their priest or pastor tells them.
It's true.
And if your priest or pastor is a good man, you'll be safe, sort of. You're still not thinking for yourself. But if he's not a good man, you're screwed.
You're in trouble.
Sometimes literally. So in 2013, I had a blog and I researched into pedophilia. And I found article after article after article after article about religious figures in every faith.
Yeah, the lie is that it's just a Roman Catholic thing. That's simply not true.
No. The truth of the matter is that these people with these predispositions choose these professions because it gives them access to children. So people ought to really take a good hard look at who they trust and who they trust around their kids.
And Penny, it always sound, even when I was a pastor, even when I was working in the church, I was a pastor just a few times. I was an evangelist most of the time, but it always made me wonder why they separate. They had this thing called children's church always. All the adults stayed in the regular sanctuary, and all the kids went to quote unquote children's church. I always found that very, very odd.
The excuse is that the kids can't sit still through the service. But, okay, I was raised Church of Christ.
You sat still.
I sat still, or Mama beat the...
Yeah.
Mama would take me out the front door, spank me. Everybody in the building would hear me scream. She'd drag me back. You learn to behave.
You do.
And yeah, I was raised Church of Christ anti.
What does that mean?
You were from the South.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're Campbellites.
Oh, okay. Absolutely. I know exactly who you are.
Yeah, the Campbellites, the antis, were the ones that if it wasn't listed in the Bible, you couldn't do it.
Yep.
That's how I was raised. And I tell people I was raised in a Christian cult, and they don't believe me. I was a Campbellite anti.
Yep.
So, yeah, I was raised in a Christian cult, wasn't I?
You were.
So I left that when I was 35 and went to the Episcopal Church after flirting with Church of God in Christ in the meantime.
Yeah, I was a minister in the Church of God in Christ.
That's a really fabulous place.
Interesting folks, and I would say mostly good folks.
Yeah. I attended the one in San Diego on Imperial Boulevard when
Interesting.
I was at San Diego State, and their pastor, Dr. McKinney, was telepathic. But he was a genuinely good man.
That's awesome.
And whatever personal flaws he had, they never made it into church.
That's great. You really can't ask for any more than that.
No, you can't. And he was a definite good part of their community there. And I drove all the way from El Cajon to go there.
Well, that's a ways.
Yeah.
You passed a lot of churches coming from El Cajon.
Yeah, I did. But Dr. McKinney was worth it.
Excellent.
So
what do you plan to do going forward with the new network and stuff, Penny?
Well, I'm supposed to be having surgery.
That's right. I knew that.
It was supposed to be Tuesday, but my new primary doctor decided to reschedule my visit, which meant that the surgery had to be rescheduled to the following week. And I'm going to be out for, the surgeon said, from 2 to 6 months, depending on how I heal.
Wow.
So by the time I get back, the network should be doing pretty good.
Well, we'll miss you.
Thanks.
And we'll definitely keep you in our thoughts. I have to leave now, but it's been great to spend an hour with you.
Well, it's been great having you.
And let me know if there's anything I can do for you, anything I can answer for you, and we appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Daryl, thanks for giving me a call.
Oh, yeah, brother.
To be here, it's a pleasure.
Yes, brother. You know, this is one of the most exciting days of the year. Really exciting, isn't it, Penny?
In Odin we trust.
Oh,
Boom.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I like it.
You do know that Odin is an altar of Daryl's.
I do know that.
Yeah.
I do know that. That's classic. Guys, I appreciate it so much. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Welcome to the
Take care.
networks. Yeah. And Penny.